Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that, at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. Shalom Farms is a nonprofit working together to build healthy communities by growing and sharing healthy food. The food they grow is distributed through their network of programs and partnerships in communities where access to healthy food is limited. Shalom Farms is the evolution of the work of the United Methodist Urban Ministries of Richmond, Virginia, which has a long history of social service work in Richmond. In 2009, they started a pilot project growing food on just half an acre at Westview. As the impact of the project quickly became clear, the organization decided to focus exclusively on food access work and eventually changed its name to Shalom Farms. In 2016, they relocated their primary growing site to a larger, more accessible 12-acre farm, 20 minutes west of Richmond. And they have since added a second 5-acre site in Richmond's Northside. This expansion has allowed them to evolve from distributing just a few thousand pounds of produce a year to local food banks to a comprehensive range of food access programs and strategies that serve over 10,000 community members annually. What makes Shalom Farms so unique is their focus on providing meaningful access to healthy food, which is at the heart of everything they do. So what does meaningful access really mean? Anna and I explore this in our podcast interview. This is Jen Ross, your Agritourist podcast host. I had the pleasure of speaking with Anna Ibrahim, Executive Director of Shalom Farms. Anna's diversity of career knowledge, experience, and exposure to food access and equity issues led her to this unique role as the ED of Shalom Farms. It was like this job was crafted just for her, and her husband intuitively knew that as soon as he saw the job post. Enjoy my inspiring conversation with Anna, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. So, Anna, tell me, I want to know a little bit about your background and what brought you to this organization. And then I was reading all the amazing things that Shalom Farms does for the community and beyond. So I want to get into all of that. And I have a bunch of questions as well. I mean, I love the term around meaningful access. There's just so much dimension to it. So tell me about you. What brought you, give me your background. I know you don't have a farming background, but you have a very diverse background that obviously was prepping you for this role. So tell me about you.
Yeah, I often say I feel like this job was divine providence. Because, right, it was a combination of basically every experience I had had up until this point. And so I feel very lucky to be here doing this work with this organization and these people. I'm from the Midwest originally, from Minnesota. My mother's parents, my grandparents were fourth generation farmers in North Dakota off of the Red River. And I spent my summers there every year in my childhood. So grew up around a lot of conventional family farming. And on my dad's side, we are Palestinian, and my grandfather and grandmother are from a town called Bisan, now called Beit Shan, in the north. And they fled in 1948. But before then, were lemon tree, olive, banana
Wow.
farmers. And the family has had many opportunities to go and see where they were and where they came from. And my grandfather, in his old age, came to the US to stay with us and stay with my family. And was a prolific gardener. They wound up in Jordan and Airbid, and he had grapevines, but for the most part, nothing else. And once he was in the Midwest with a big backyard, he made the most of it. So,
I can
um,
imagine.
had a lot of fun back there with a little hand tiller. And so, yeah, kind of just like I have never ever in my life had a green thumb, but had a love and an appreciation for what it takes to
Yeah.
grow food, both on a large scale and a small scale, and also an appreciation for the people who love to grow food, right? Because both of my grandfathers really had a passion around what they did, and I got to see that firsthand. And so I graduated college during the recession and decided to join a service corps. The one I joined is the Lutheran Volunteer Corps. There are several sort of religious affiliated volunteer corps. They run very much like AmeriCorps, but there was a spirituality element that I liked about it. You had to live in intentional community. You had to share resources. You had to sort of explore different elements of your personal spirituality with one another. And then you worked at a nonprofit in a city in the United States
What
for,
attracted you to that? What attracted you to that piece of it?
yeah, I grew up in a multi-faith household. So mom was Lutheran Christian, dad was Muslim. And I think that just built in me an appreciation for exploration for both of them. Faith is a foundation, but not necessarily a practice. We went to Islamic school, we went to Sunday school, we celebrated Christmas, we fasted for Ramadan and celebrated Eid. We just did all of it. And so I sort of developed this multi-faith perspective and this appreciation again for the varying ways that our faith sort of informs our values, no matter what our faith is, and how we choose to live our lives because of that. And so I think the idea of doing service work with an element of faith was just really, really appealing to me. I had spent a year in college in Jerusalem studying Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and the history of the region. And so had also just sort of I was in that space kind of, I think, in my head where I just really wanted to continue that exploration even post college. So,
Hey, it's Jen, your AgriTourist podcast host. I need to interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I always want to support the people I interview. So if you're planning on visiting the Berkshires this summer and fall season, Dory Schofield, owner of Berkshire Farm Sanctuary and Save a Pet on Long Island, and myself have partnered up to help her create an Agra destination at her sanctuary. We are starting small with 5 exciting chocolate cocktail hours for all of you chocolate lovers out there. You'll start with a chocolate mocktail or a cocktail and indulge in some delicious charcuterie, plant-based of course. Then you will be guided through a chocolate experience and learn how chocolate is made from bean to bar. Savor the tastes of real chocolate from all around the world and depart the farmhouse with some of your favorite chocolate bars in hand. Proceeds support all of Dory's rescued animals at the sanctuary. Remember, there are only 5 dates starting Saturday, July 5th, and once they're booked, that's it. So visit berkshirefarmsanctuary.org or heartbeatfarms.com to register now. Thank you for listening, and I will hand you back over to the podcast. That's impressive, and probably has, especially right now, it probably contributes so much to what you're doing right now. And we'll get into that, but just that knowledge and that awareness. So I think that's terrific. So go ahead. College.
yeah.
You had, okay, so you have an MBA. in design
Do.
strategy?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, that came later. So the service corps that I did placed me in Washington, D.C. at a direct service organization called Bread for the City, which did food-based direct service work as well as other direct service work. So they had a medical clinic and social services and legal services, but my role was to manage the volunteers who came into the organization, which meant that I got a nice broad slice of the whole org, but a lot of the work was the food-based work. So they had a food pantry, they had a roof garden program at both of their sites. And the year that I started, they had just secured a contract with the University of Maryland, which is a land grant institution. And so it had a bit of land for Bread for the City to start an orchard and grow on that land for their food pantry. And so I
Okay.
wound up spending a lot of time out at the orchard site doing the initial planning and planting and working with volunteers there and kind of caught the farming bug again. It was like I had had this whole history and I just really loved being outside and working alongside other people for this like really tangible thing at the end of it. And so I stayed past my service year for about another year at Bread for the City because I loved that work. And then decided that I wanted to try my hand at a CSA farm to see if like maybe this was something I wanted to do long term. And so I moved back to Minnesota. I worked at a CSA farm in central Minnesota for not even a full season. I started in the spring. So excited, making ag minimum wage, which in Minnesota at the
So,
time,
so this was a job.
it
Like
was a
this was
job. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
And
yeah.
what do you recall the name of the farm? Just curious.
Oh man, no, it was maybe Prairie something. It doesn't exist anymore. The farmer
Okay.
moved to Colorado and it's
And
tough. It's a tough business, So
oh yes, see, especially
yes,
CSA. I mean,
yes,
you're growing a lot of different item, of different produce and
yep.
fruits and stuff. Do you know how big the CSA was? Just
I
curious.
want to say I don't know how much land he had. When I think now, I'm like, I want to like the way my brain recalls it is like he had a 30-acre farm. But what I know now about acreage and what I remember from what we worked on, it's like if he had a 30-acre farm, we were not working on all of the acreage of that farm.
Well, thank God.
It felt
It would
closer
have been
to maybe 10 in
right.
total that we were
Okay.
working. Um, and
That's
we
a
also
lot.
it's a
That's a
lot. It was
lot.
still quite, I mean, it was quite a bit of work. It was
Yes.
a pretty large CSA. There weren't tons of them
Okay.
at the time. And so, and it was a house full of interns. We lived on site together.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, it was hard work. It was very low paying, which I knew going into it. It was about the learning experience. But we worked alongside a lot of migrant workers. And I just pretty quickly realized the disparity between, all of us were 20-year-old interns. In our, early to mid 20s. And these were adults with families that were working alongside us and getting paid better because they were much more skilled, but not getting paid well by any definition. And I just, the way that I say it is, the farm was not the way I expected it to be run. I sort of had this idea in my head that if you were a CSA farm, you shared some values, around like sustainability and perhaps how sustainability then informs how we treat the folks who work the land. And that was not the case. It was about keeping costs low. It was about getting as much work done as possible. Um, and I staged a little bit of a revolt. And I and a handful of other interns left. I called the Minnesota Department of Labor. Um, and it wasn't for me. What I learned very quickly is I'm not cut out to be a farmer. At least not in that way. I think now again, as I like look back, I'm like, there are many ways that you can run a farm, and we could have done that differently, but that's not how it was done. And so I think I made it to July, and then I was like, I should go back to DC. I'm not cut
Well,
out for this. That's okay.
but that was probably a really good experience in your life. And and,
Yes, it
brought
absolutely.
attention to certain things that have been carried forward. So I find it interesting. I mean, you need these experiences.
That's
So
right. That's right. And there's now when I think about the complexity of being a small farmer, it's like there's so much pressure to keep costs low. There's so much strain on your personal finances as you try to, start and grow a small
yeah,
farm. And right there, I do believe that we have this obligation to pay people well, to give them the benefits we can give them. Um, and so, yes, I wouldn't say it's complicated, but it's hard. And I have a much deeper appreciation of both how hard it is to start a farm and how hard it is to work a farm, and how important it is to take care of the people who are doing that
yep,
work. So,
yep.
yeah.
Excellent. So you went back to Washington?
I went back to DC. I did. I'd also fallen in love, which probably at least a little bit influenced my decision. So I had left someone behind. I went back to DC, and I was looking for, in direct service work, you can get a little burnt out on what feels like this band-aid approach of like, we're just treating
Yeah.
the symptoms, we're not treating the problem. And so I went back to DC with an eye towards working in public policy, just like a little bit further up that chain. And so I found myself at a organization that did faith-based organizing, and specifically grass tops organizing. So they worked with faith leaders across the spectrum, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, a whole host of faith leaders, and they worked with them on local issues. So we did state-based work, mainly in swing states, which at the time were places like Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, and then some federal level work as well.
Okay.
And so I started in operations there and stayed for quite a while doing that work. Left as the COO, went to business school while I was there, got my MBA. And again, incredibly rewarding work. Work that I did from 2015 to 2022. So tough work,
Yeah.
when you think about sort of what was happening in the political space. We worked on just a host of issues, very few things that food touches, but you don't talk about how food touches them. So, we were working on things like harm reduction and immigration. Um, and I got to see firsthand the power of really grassroots organizing that then reaches, it's like these faith leaders that we were organizing were being organized too, right? By their congregations, by their communities. And so I just started to see that like no matter what you do at that policy level, the ideas come from the people, right? And so I found myself missing some of that direct service type work, no longer seeing it like a band-aid and more seeing it as the fertile ground that solutions come from, and wanting to be a part of an organization that was more locally based. DC is DC, and wanting to be a part of an organization that was connected to the people who were in it, and the people who actually probably had the
Yeah.
solutions. And so started looking for that next spot, kind of with
Well,
that in.
hold that thought. I want to ask you a question. So, through those years,
Mhm.
um, what were some of the topics or some of the issues that were resonating with you the most? You were touching a lot of different issues going on in the
Yeah.
world. But for you personally, what was resonating with you? What did you really want? What
Yeah.
did you want to tackle?
Yeah. It's interesting. Something I will say often is I'm perhaps a little issue agnostic, which isn't to say that I don't care about many things, because I do. It's more that because I care about many things, where I see my skill set being most useful, is in sort of the systems internal side of the work. And so It could have been food, it could have been housing, it could have been a million different things. And I worked on many, many different things. But where I felt like I had something to contribute was in building the internal systems within an organization, whether it be about how we ran our finances or how we set up our benefits or how we paid our employees, how we organized our work, how we met our goals, how we strategized. All of those things are the things that I felt like I had the most to offer in. And so, what I really feel like I honed during that time was how to organize people internally, how to facilitate a conversation so all the ideas got out in the room, and then how to make sure that the best ideas were the ones that we moved forward with. I think that um, my strengths come in my abilities to ask questions and then sort of make it happen. And so the issue areas um, were vast and they all were important. But I think that my contribution was on that internal side.
And that's important for a leader to have those types of skills and be able to do that, especially today.
Yeah.
So, okay, so how did you connect, or how did you find, or how did they find you, Shalom
Yeah,
Farms?
So, we were actually so we had left DC, we had moved to California, in January of
Is
2020.
this the love that you went back to DC for?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had stayed, it all worked out and we had stayed together and we had
That's great.
decided to make a big move, to really, to test out being in a new space together. And so we moved to California in January of 2020, which is a horrible time to move to a new place. Who knew?
Or it could have been
And
the best time,
could have been the
actually.
best time. And what wound up happening is that spring, we just happened to be back on the East Coast for various reasons. And the world shut down. And so we stayed. So we had just gotten this apartment in Oakland and we weren't there. We were with my now husband's mother. And so we spent a good time. He's from the Virginia Beach area. And so we spent that whole summer with his mom in his childhood home, which was quite the experience, and helping take care of his grandfather, who she was taking care of. And then that fall, we drove to Minnesota to help out my family with some things for a little while. And we got back to California a couple days before Election Day in November. And had a lovely couple of months. And then we looked around and we were like, what are we doing here? Like, none of our people are here. We just spent a whole year really appreciating what it means to be close to family. I don't think we should be here anymore. And so wanted to go back to the East Coast, didn't want to go back to DC. And so we started sort of shopping around for like, what's a mid-sized city? Had this like this idea in mind that we wanted to be more locally grounded. What's a mid-sized city that has some things happening where we feel like we could have an impact? And my husband almost sort of sheepishly was like, well, there's Richmond. And I knew nothing of Richmond, Virginia. We would drive through it, and there was a really great grocery store. We would pick up some excellent craft beer on our way to his mom's house. Like, that's all I knew.
All I knew is when you went down 95. That was from when I used to drive from New York to Florida with my parents. That
Yep.
was on the map. It was on
Yes,
the flip map.
right. You could pull off, you could get some gas. It was there. Yeah, exactly.
Funny.
That and capital of the Confederacy. Those were my two reference points. And, Richmond had just gone through a pretty big upheaval, the 2020 protests and the murder of George Floyd. I mean, the city had really been through it, which I didn't fully appreciate when I got here. Not in the the whole country had been through it, but how that specifically played out here was not something that I had a lot of knowledge of. And I kind of, my husband's like, you made this choice. And I'm like, I did make this choice, but I had no idea what I was doing when I said yes. I just sort of was like, sure, it's 2 hours away from DC. It's 2 hours away from your mom. It feels like something worth trying. It's a beautiful city, like there's a gorgeous river. There's lots of, hikes and nature and, excellent food. Like, great, let's do it. So we moved here and bought a house in like a weekend or something. It was very fast. We really were just going for it. Both of us were still working for our organizations back in DC. Um, Everything had gone remote because of the pandemic. And so I was like, I'm going to start looking, the whole point of moving here is I'm going to find something, but I didn't know what I was going to find or how. It was really haphazard. As I'm repeating it back to you, I'm like, I don't know what we were doing, but we did it. And it was my husband who started like following all of these. There's lots of urban farms here and around here, lots of local farms, lots of cool things happening with them and around them. And so he had started following a bunch of stuff. And so he saw the Instagram post that was like, hey, this organization's hiring for an executive director. And he sent it to me and he was like, read this job description. It's like everything you've ever done in one job description.
Oh, so it was your husband who
Yes. Yeah. And so I did, and I was just like, yes. I mean, like, how could I not? This is it. Um, so yeah, it felt just so right so quickly. And so I started that process, and part of it was going out to the farm and meeting the staff. Which was really lovely and really important to me that I got to talk to the people who were doing the day-to-day work. And yeah, that was that. So we moved to Richmond in the fall of 2021. We got married on our back porch a couple months later, and then I started working at Shalom that spring. So,
wow.
mhm.
So let's talk about Shalom. What is it?
Yes.
I know that's
So
a very loaded question, but I just really want to explore all
yes,
that it does and also what you've brought to the table in the time you've been there.
for
So talk to
sure.
me about the organization. It's a
Yeah,
nonprofit,
it's a
correct? And yeah,
nonprofit.
give me some
So
of the history also of how it formed and stuff like that.
absolutely. So, Shalom Farms is a nonprofit. It's about 15 years old. We call ourselves a farm and food justice organization, and the goal of the organization is to work for a more equitable food system in Richmond, Virginia. I would say that that's an evolution of how we talk about it, and a slight evolution on how we do it. But for much of Shalom's history, it's done some pretty basic things. So, 15 years ago, it was started by the Methodist Conference here in Richmond. They had some extra cash that needed to go towards a mission. It was 2008. They wanted to do affordable housing. Turned out it was a terrible time to go into the housing market. And so they were looking for a pivot. And there was another Methodist organization that had some land out here. And so they said, well, you can use this acre if you want to try to do something with it. And so they decided they were going to start a farm. And I don't know if, folks sort of remember that like 2008, 2009 moment, but, Michelle Obama was building a, vegetable garden at the White House, and we were all talking about how food pantries did not have fresh food and what was wrong with us. And so there really was this like, it's why the organization I was at DC in the same time was building all these rooftop gardens and exploring all this urban agriculture. It really was a moment. And so they sort of captured that moment themselves in starting this organization. The goal in the beginning was to grow food for the food bank. So they would grow the food, they would not distribute the food. They would basically just sell it to the food bank at a, low cost, but to help support the organization. And it was almost entirely volunteer run. So the other point was sort of to give the Methodist community here and other faith communities a place to volunteer where they knew they were giving back directly to their local community. It started with basically a programs person and a farmer. And both of them are no longer with the organization, but I had the opportunity to work with both of them, and they're lovely, lovely humans who built this whole organization over the last 15 years. And Steve, the farmer, basically drove by and was like, you guys don't know what you're doing, and sent a letter with a farm plan that was like, this is what you need to do if this is what you want to do. And they were
Wow.
like, oh my gosh, thank you. Can we hire you?
Wow.
And
And at the
Dominic,
at
who
that time, the funding was strictly from the church to
yes. So
do
the
all
church
this.
was
Okay.
funding the whole mission. It was
Yep.
like a
Okay.
mission of the Methodist Church. And then Dominic, who became the executive director, is from the area, is very well connected, incredibly charismatic person. And so the two of them together really built the thing up and expanded it beyond the Methodist church. So the Methodist conference here were incredibly supportive. It was their founding initiative, but then the organization really evolved from that point on. And so eventually started its own distribution mechanism. So they started a mobile market program, and they were going predominantly to public housing spaces with the produce, and they were selling it at a very, very low cost. And doing some like cooking demonstration alongside of it. So the idea was,
I
let's
like
meet
that.
you where you are when we're talking about meaningful access. Let's meet you where you are. Let's make sure that like what we're giving you in terms of produce is something that you like or are familiar with. And if you don't like it or are not familiar with, let's at least show you or give you some options for how to make it in a way that you might like. And so that was kind of the beginning of the distribution directly from the farm, still predominantly going to the food bank, and then also local food pantries. There are so many sort of food distribution initiatives here in the city, both through local churches, but also through mutual aid organizations, community fridges, that sort of thing. And so the food was getting out through those avenues. But the distribution directly to the housing sites was really, really effective. And so that started to grow. And so now we have
And you
in
were selling that, you said, at a
yes,
low
selling it at
cost.
a very low
Okay.
cost.
Okay.
That was in the beginning, I think, grounded mostly in like what felt affordable to people. You know, it was like, does this feel okay? Like, are people saying this is a good deal? Great, then that's what we'll pay. We were not doing any sort of calculation around like covering costs, or that was not the goal. The idea was really that all of us get to vote with our dollar all of the time, and there's a dignity in choice. And there's certainly a dignity in choice when you go to a food pantry and are picking stuff up for free, when folks get to shop the pantry and not just be handed a bag. But there's also a dignity in choice in being able to say, I think this is valuable and I am going to pay what I think it's worth or what I can afford to pay because it's something I like and something I want and something I want to see more of. And so that was the idea in offering it at cost. There's also sometimes suspicion around free food. Like, is this not high quality? Why is it being offered for free? And both of our farms are certified naturally grown, which is essentially the same standards as, you know, organic farming without the paperwork or the data collection because we don't have the capacity to do it. But as pure farmers, you know, making sure that we're doing what we say we're doing in terms
Right.
of our sustainability practices. And so we wanted people to know that like this is really high quality food grown specifically for you. And yes, there is value to that. And so that was the thought in making it a market and not just free food distribution in these spaces.
That's
Although,
great.
you know, often when there was excess, people could always pick up excess. But so that's grown into what is now our mobile market program. We went through a strategic planning process almost 3 years ago now, right when I started. And the part of the insights gained during that strategic planning process was, while the markets had basically only been in public housing spaces, some of them were senior housing, some of them were all ages housing, but we were only there. That was, you know, whether it be city-owned housing or like Better Housing Coalition-owned housing. And so we decided we wanted to be in more community spaces. The goal was, if our stance is everyone deserves access to fresh food, then we need to be in places that are more accessible. And our markets were running in the mornings and afternoons. And so we knew we weren't catching working families. We knew we weren't catching single adults who might be students. We knew there was a
Right.
whole, we knew we weren't catching folks who needed affordable food but weren't living in public housing necessarily, right? And so
Yep.
we needed to diversify where our markets were. The fear in doing that was then there would be folks of means who would find us, and then was our food going to who needed it the most if other people were encountering our markets, people who could otherwise shop a regular farmer's market. And that fear was sort of twofold. One, that like we would be in some way depleting the level of the amount of produce that people who needed it most had access to. Two, that we would be competing with local farmers who also need to make a living wage and make a living by having really low prices that then people who could otherwise pay more would be paying, right, when they
Right.
found it. And we decided those were both things that we could overcome. So we moved to places like public libraries, YMCAs, elementary schools. We moved our markets to some evening hours, some weekend hours, and we set up a fair pricing system. And so we just asked folks to sort of think about their economic situation. Are you able to have savings? Do you have inherited wealth? Do you get to go on vacations? Do you not worry about your bills? This is the price that you should pay for this produce. And that price was marked against what you would see at a regular farmer's market, right? We just priced our produce similarly. And then it was, if you need your produce to be more affordable, this price is 50% of that price. And then you can also use your SNAP or EBT benefits to get an additional 50% off. And so now your food's really at 25% of that price. And so what that looks like at our mobile markets is you can get 4 heirloom tomatoes for $1. Um, you can get a pound of fresh spinach for $1.50. And so it was really this sort of pay it forward idea where it's like, if you can't afford to pay more, we all, we need more places to gather as community. We're already so segregated in so many ways, and certainly economically when you look at neighborhoods in Richmond. And so it's okay for us to all shop the same market, and it's okay for the prices to look different for whatever price that you need. You make that decision yourself. We're not doing any sort of verification or certification, but you know that if you pay more, you're paying it forward to help support the work of Shalom Farms, and to help keep the produce affordable for everyone else.
I have
Um,
a question. So
yeah.
when you say mobile market, what is it? Is it a
Yes.
truck that pulls up? I used to have a mobile farmers market truck that
It's a
had a
great
thing that,
question. Yes.
so I'm just curious, physically, what is it? And also, I also want to understand, what is that interaction of, you know, making the decision on how much you can afford? Like, is it at the point of sale? Like, how does that work? Because I know
Yeah.
that's a tough, like, I've addressed that with a few organizations, and they struggle sometimes with how to create that interaction so it's not intimidating, so it's not, it doesn't make people feel bad or feel that they can't afford. So talk to me about both of those things.
Yes, great questions. Mobile markets can look so different. So I'll tell you what ours looks like, and I'm sure it doesn't look like the next person's. So we were originally working out of a box truck, which we kind of
That's what
didn't
I
love.
had.
Yeah.
It was tough.
It's tough, right?
Plus it
It's tough.
polluted. It was
Yes,
like it was like
yes.
the worst. It was diesel and it
Oh
was like
no.
it was a friend's old truck, so we got it for free. And it was like totally anti what I wanted, like as far as environment goes, but we did it, and it got us what we needed. But yeah, it would have had to evolve if I had continued it. But it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah. And it stores the most. Like it's a very
yes.
practical choice for many
Yes.
reasons. So we're working at 2 farm sites, so it helped us bring the stuff from the farm that was outside the city into the city. But
Right.
for many reasons, one, it always needed maintenance. We bought it used. Two, yes, it was, a polluting mess. We still have it. There's maybe a mouse nest in it right now. But also, we didn't love sort of the optics and the feel of running the market that way, right? It's like we were like handing watermelons down from this like high up thing down to the ground to the customer. And it just felt a little bit like disaster relief every time we were
Right.
doing it, in a way that just like didn't feel dignified and good. And so we moved to it's a Sprinter van. And so we have 2 of them that run concurrently so markets can happen at the same time in different locations. Um, and it's a tent table setup. It should feel exactly like a stand at a farmer's market. It's just a standalone stand. So tables go out, crates of produce go out, price tags go out. We weigh, we bag, we check out, all under the tent. Folks can shop and pick their own, or we can put it in a bag for you. It's whatever you prefer. Sometimes it's a combination where people point at the one they want and we grab it and we bag it for them. But that's sort of the experience. So it's all on one level. It hopefully feels like shopping any farm stand you might find at a market or on the side of the road or whatever. And then that interaction about price is actually Pretty simple. What we have are member and supporter pricing. And so we basically just say like it's a pay what you choose model, whichever price point feels right to you. And if you pay the supporter pricing, know that you're supporting Shalom Farms, which is a nonprofit, and that your contribution goes to continuing running these markets and growing the produce and all of that. And then people just decide, they say, I want to do member pricing, I want to do supporter pricing. And what we've seen is about 25% of our sales is supporter pricing. The rest is member-based pricing. And people switch, right? Like one week when folks are, it's the top of the month and people have great benefits and they want to support the work and they'll say, hey, I'm going to pay supporter pricing today. And so it might not be the same like clean cut way people think about how that price point breaks down. People choose to oscillate between one or the
Yeah.
other depending on what works for them.
That's terrific. I like the way you did that. It's very clean.
Mhm.
It's simple. And it is. I mean, I think people will realize that, hey, I want to, I want this option. So I need to support it in a different way when I can.
Yep.
So I think that's a great approach. Really, really seamless.
Mhm.
So great. That's terrific. I want to go back to the meaningful access because I haven't seen that defined this way, and I think although people are doing this, I love the way this is defined. Now, is this something that came out of that strategic meeting? That
No, it's something
okay,
this is something that's actually, I think, been pretty core to how Shalom Farms operates once they started distributing the food
okay,
themselves. Um, and I think how we talk about it probably has changed over time a little
okay,
bit. But yeah, the general premise is meaningful means that it's where somebody is at a time that works for them, that it's food that's culturally appropriate that they would want to have and
yes, very
eat, right?
important.
Yep. Um, and that it's at a price that works for them, right? And so it really is about, I guess, sort of like curating the product in a way that works best for the customer, which in some ways is how like anything works, right? When you think about capitalism,
Yep,
but sometimes is not the way that service-based organizations work, and so. Um, I think that the hope is that we're providing an experience that is valuable to our customers in
yep,
all of those ways. And that access isn't just about like there's food, but there's high quality, good food where you are that you want at a
yep,
price you can afford.
yep. Very important. Very important. So you have two locations now, correct? So the
We have
original
two farm
location.
sites.
Okay,
Yes.
farm sites. So tell me
Yeah.
about those and the differences in those because I was actually really curious about um I guess the 14 acre and what you're doing there because it talked about winter growing and so let's yeah, tell me about the two locations.
Yes. So the 1 acre farm that the organization started at, they knew they could grow more. They had sort of, honed in on their operations. And so they moved to the 14-acre site in Powhatan in 2017. That was a big, push and a big shift for the organization.
How far is that
And
from the
it's
original site?
about 20 minutes
Okay,
from the
that's
city-based
nothing.
farm site.
Okay,
And it came first, although the city site followed very quickly. And so the Powhatan-based farm site is 14 acres. There's 6 high tunnels at that site, half of which are heated. And so when
nice.
I first got to Shalom Farms, it was like this question that I always hung over, like, well, we could do winter growing. Well, we could do winter growing. And in doing the strategic plan, we didn't like specifically say we would do winter growing, but we left room to be like, if we could do it, this like experimentation with program extension would be in line with the strategic plan. And so this past winter, we were like, no, I think we can do it. And
Define
so
that for me. What does that mean? How are
yes.
you defining
So
winter
our
growing?
normal season is May through November, sometimes the first week of December. And then we put both farms to bed. So kind of we start the work sort of starts in February. It's done by the second week of December. And then everybody takes a nice long break and comes back again in February. Um, That's not entirely true. Many folks do lots of work in January, but the farms take a break, and some of our farm workers get to take a
That's the
break.
old thinking, right?
Yeah.
I remember that. It never
Um,
happened.
Not really. I'm like, that's not fair. Everyone's doing so much. But this year or like last season, what we did instead is the city farm did get put to bed, but the Powhatan farm site basically staggered its fall growing so that it could put plants into the high tunnels in the third week of December. So we grew through December and early January, and then we kicked off a limited mobile market run from mid-Jan to mid-March.
Nice.
Um, and we did 2 markets indoors at sites that we normally do our markets at, but usually outside. And we sold out basically every market. Everything we grew went. Yep.
Yeah, winter, they're very successful because you
Yes.
don't have fresh local produce. I think I think that's a definitely an opportunity for farmers. What are you mostly growing certain types like greens or certain things
Because
that,
it's winter, right?
yeah,
It's like
certain
Virginia.
things don't grow?
Yeah, Virginia can have very mild winters. That is not what we got this first winter we decided to do
Of
this. It was
course.
extremely cold, many more freezing days than we ever have. Lots of money spent on propane. But we did mostly the things that you would see in early spring. So collards, kale, turnips,
Yeah,
carrots, beets, bunching onions, that was
great.
that was the stuff that,
Yep.
yeah, that went.
Excellent. And so, okay, so you deemed that successful. I mean, is
Yes,
it
I
worth the
think
cost of the fuel? Because I know obviously greenhouses, heating greenhouses, there's a lot of other, there's a lot of new ways to heat greenhouses with, different methods, but I know that the traditional ways can be very costly. So how
we're
are you
doing that
weighing?
cost benefit analysis now. I'm almost positive that on a piece of paper, maybe we broke even from a sale to fuel ratio, but certainly not from a sale to fuel plus labor ratio. And that's kind of okay, right? It's why we're a nonprofit. Um, so we'll see what that ultimate breakdown was, but I think from a programmatic standpoint and from like an internal organization standpoint, it worked really well for staffing. It worked really well for our customers.
Yeah.
It was valuable programming, and we have every intention of continuing to
Yep.
do it. Um,
And I'm sure
yeah,
as you evolve it, you can look at different ways to make it more economical. But I
yes,
think it's
exactly.
great that you did that and you proved concept that it's wanted and needed, and
Exactly.
that's important.
Yes.
So there was
Yep.
one other thing. So at that farm, you also, it says the farm will assist with research on different growing conditions on produce
Mhm.
nutrition in partnership with national research institutions like the Rodale Institute. So,
Yes.
what are you doing? Because that is
So
intriguing.
this is all sort of part of the strategic plan shift. So Powhatan was our primary growing site up until a couple years ago for obvious reasons. It was the first farm site we moved to after we left the 1 acre. It has 14 acres available to us. We have 6 high tunnels on that property. There's only one high tunnel on the city-based farm. And so Powhatan was where we did all of our production. Through the strategic planning process, what we realized was we only distribute in the city, and there's a really special thing about growing in the city for the city and being able to bring people to see a production farm, which is something folks do not see very often anymore. That city farm is on a bus line. It's much more accessible to many more people. And so we really wanted to invest in making that city farm kind of like a full scale demonstration of all of the programming happening at Shalom Farms and really the hub of all that we do from a production and distribution and engagement standpoint, which then left like this 14-acre site that is gorgeous and fully equipped to grow so much more. And we would grow all the produce in the world if labor were not as expensive
Yeah,
as it is, but like we believe in paying people well. And
right.
that means that our budget limits how much food we can grow in a given year. And so it was like, what are the cool things we could experiment with at Powhatan as we go into a new strategic plan to think about how that site could be used in the future? Both of our farm sites are not owned by Shalom Farms. They are generously leased for a very, very low dollar amount. So
Okay.
those leases have end dates. They're both very long. But the Powhatan farm site is owned by someone who at some point is going to want to develop that land. The city farm site is owned by a seminary that has some more values alignment, and so we just don't, because we don't know the long-term sort of
That's
plan,
hard.
it's
That whole
hard.
land access
Exactly.
is,
It's a huge issue.
yeah.
And investment in that land, right? We've already invested so much in these
Yep.
spaces that,
Yeah, you
we have,
can't take back the soil.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we wanted to take this year in this strategic plan to be like, what Powhatan is an incredible site. We have access to it for however long we have access to it. It's a gift. What should we be doing with it? And so this year we're trying a lot of different things. So we tried this extended growing season that only happened at the Powhatan farm site and was very successful. It also means that that farm then will be on a slightly different schedule. Those farmers are going to get a break in the summer, which is not a thing that happens for farmers, but for Powhatan it will. Um, and we're trying some of this research-based work. So, of course, with all of the cuts in federal funding, it was a little bit up in the air whether or not we'd be able to do this year, but so far, so good through Rodale. And I am not the person to talk to you about all of the specifics, but the general idea with the research is that we will grow things that we would otherwise grow for the markets anyways. I think leeks and something else are on the agenda for that acre, but we will do it in a way and with materials where we can report back on the success of, and I think this one's soil amendment based, but don't quote me there, but the success of trying it this way versus this way. So there'll be some good
Okay.
data reporting that we're doing. We will be setting up those acres exactly how they need to be set up for this research-based grant, but we will be growing things that are easily used at the mobile markets and feed into our programming. And so it's sort of this perfect combination of both doing our programming the way we want to do it and experimenting with doing more of this research-based work. It'll be a draw for folks who are interested in that stuff. So we'll lead tours and,
Yep.
we do educational tours anyways, but specifically around that. So folks can come and see. And so, yeah, we will see. It's us trying out something new this
Excellent. No, I think
season.
that's terrific. So just talk to me about, okay, let's talk about funding because, initially you started out as the church, funded the initial program. How has that evolved and where are your dependencies and how have they been impacted? Obviously, everyone's impacted in some way and may not be a direct way, it could be indirect way. I know one of the organizations I interviewed recently who has a similar mission. They said that they don't depend on a lot of grants, but they have a lot of donors, and they're concerned, their concern is those donors now are shifting some of their money to where grants have dried up, and they may lose some of those donors. So it's kind of like everyone is impacted differently. So I'm just
Mhm.
curious, what are your dependencies and, what is your thinking around this? Because one of the things I've also said is regardless of what's happening now, this can happen at any time. Grants,
Yes.
we can't depend on some of these grants as, always being there. And even I work with a historical society and I say the same thing. We need to sometimes create different streams of income or varied streams of income and really be constantly thinking about new ways of income streams. Like you just mentioned the Rodale thing. I mean, that's a grant, correct?
Correct.
So
Yes, exactly.
that's a
Things to
unique
support the
way
farm.
to bring in, yes, in a grant for the farm. So yeah. So
Yeah,
please
yeah, yeah.
let me know.
Yes, there's so many ways that we're thinking about income streams, and we do try to keep sort of a diversified funding based. We, up until this past year, had not received federal funding. We had run some Produce RX programming, which is food as medicine programming, which has gained some traction
Yes.
over the last few years. We had done that with just our, with regional
Can you
granting.
just explain what that is? Because I thought
Sure,
that was
yeah.
very interesting as
So
well.
Food is medicine, Produce RX. The idea is that we can help treat diet-related disease, both preventatively and after the fact, with the food that we eat. And it is research-based. It's been proven that when folks are able to have access to high-quality fresh food, and meals that are tailored to their diet-related disease, their condition improves. And so Produce RX work is really about both measuring sort of those clinical impacts. So you need to be working with healthcare partners so that you can be doing that type of data collection and making sure folks have access to fresh food. And then also hopefully making sure that folks have support both in like preparing that food and in sort of creating the habits over time that help them maintain this lifestyle long term, right? Because there's so much of food for us is habit and ease and convenience,
Yep.
and so sort of meeting all those needs and helping improve health outcomes over
And
time.
that program was through the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture.
That's correct. So
Okay,
that's a grant. It's a USDA grant. And so we had done that programming just in our own way for several years. But this year was the first year that we received federal funding
great.
to do that programming. And we are doing it. So we have several healthcare partners lined up, and we'll be launching our first cohort this year.
So
But
that
that
has stayed intact.
that has stayed
Good.
intact.
Good news. I like hearing
Good news,
that.
great news, and we're excited to be bringing that programming to um, some of our healthcare partners here in Richmond. And yeah, we will see. But it's
Excellent.
valuable research, and we're happy to continue to be a part of that. And then that's our federal funding. So I think as you said, there's all sorts of like residual ways organizations can and will be impacted by these changes. I think for us, it's a lot of like, how does your average person feel about cost? Because about 40% of our funding is individual donors, and 40% of our funding is local and regional grants, community-based grants, family foundations, et cetera.
Okay.
And so those things are really like mostly based on, do we feel like we have the resources to continue to contribute in the ways that we do? We also have some corporate funding, which similarly is kind of based on like, do we have the resources to continue to do this? I so far feel pretty hopeful because we are very locally based. We operate within a city who knows who we are and knows what we do. And folks are invested. This isn't just like, oh yeah, I sent that check that one time. They come to our events, they care about the work. And so I think that that type of community investment in times like these is really, really
Yep.
valuable. I also think that because Shalom Farms works within this larger ecosystem that is built on partnership, we don't do anything we do alone, and we know that. And that means when things are more difficult, I think we're part of a network of support amongst fellow organizations that
Yep.
will figure out what we need to do to keep working with and for the people we work with and for. And so might be a little naive, I think it's not going to not be tough, and it certainly is tough in many, many ways.
Absolutely.
But I continue to feel hopeful that we will be able
Good.
to do what we do, yeah, this
Excellent.
year.
Excellent. You have employees and you have volunteers. How many employees make this happen?
Yeah. So we have about 20 employees. And I would say roughly half of those folks are full-time in our admin and program and leadership capacities. And the other half are seasonal. We work on a contract basis, so it's a little bit like being a teacher. You have a full contract, but you work a set amount of months. It's just you don't really often get the summer off, except for those
Yep.
two farmers who will this year. You get the winter off. So those folks join us in February, and they stay through usually the first week of December. And then if they renew, they come back for the next season. So about 20 staff people peak season who are making it all happen across our distribution, our engagement, and our production teams. On the volunteer side, so our engagement team does sort of all of our external engagement work, and that is with educational visitors, field trippers, adult learners, with our community visitors, so people who are using our resources or our spaces for their programming, and then our volunteers. And so the farm sees about 5,000 plus volunteers a year between both sites. We absolutely would not exist without our volunteers. And about 70 to 80 of those folks are what we call lead volunteers. They show up on the farm every single week for a shift, just like their staff person. And they do that all season long. So, and then our mobile markets are also, we have staff, there's always one staff person there, but they are then additionally staffed by volunteers who show up regularly for that mobile market. So our customers get to see the same faces every time they shop, so that those people are knowledgeable about the market and the produce. And so, yes, the organization is very much supported by volunteer help in every aspect.
Excellent. So I just want to just ask you one more question to sum up. Like, what keeps you going? What's motivating you to keep going with this and to keep evolving this thing?
I think for me, what I know is it's needed. What I see is there's so much potential, and what keeps me going is the collaboration in that potential. And so I think what I have loved about being in Richmond and working for this organization is all the adjacent work that is happening. There is an incredible mutual aid organization that runs a grocery store, and an incredible community fridge organization that operates fridges throughout the city, and incredible food pantry partners that are working to make sure there's a wide variety of food that meets an ever-changing population with the things that they most want. There are Black-led and brown-led urban farm organizations that are creating space for people who have been historically divested from and have not had access to land. There's just so much that is happening, and we are just a slice of it. And what that means to me is that there is so much more we can do together long term to not only meet the need, but to hopefully shift and change the food system long term. And so I think that potential and that partnership, when things feel hard or more impossible, is what keeps me going. And I think that there's such a huge community of support here in Richmond for this work. And like I said, people who are just deeply invested in supporting their neighbor. And so, yeah, just that gives me a lot of hope.
Beautifully said. And I guess Richmond was a good decision.
Yes, yes. I don't think you can ever take the Midwest out of this particular person, but yes, Richmond was a good decision.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure they are thrilled to have you. So it's been such a pleasure. I love everything that everyone is doing there. I know it takes a village. So I definitely want to keep in touch because I love what you're doing. And one day, hopefully, I can visit. So
yes, we would love to have you. Yep. Thank you so much, Jen.
I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time. So I was recently listening to one of the Grounded in Maine podcasts produced by Amy Fagan. The podcast is an open conversation about being mindful about how we show up in the world. It's focused on sustainability and how sustainability impacts every part of our life. What are some of the most important takeaways that people will get from your podcast?
one of the things that I hope that people will take away from the podcast is encouragement. Like, I want them to not feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars to be part of the solution, because, there are a lot of sustainable, things that say sustainability or sustainable, like solar panels or organic cotton and stuff like that. Like, some things are just more expensive because they have that tagline, that phrase or whatever. But there are so many ways that you can be sustainable. You just have to be a little bit creative. And so I'm putting out all these ideas that what people are doing, just to put the thought out there that we can all be part of it without going broke.
So how can people find your podcast?
My podcast is wherever podcasts are found. It is just called Grounded in Maine. I also have my Instagram is where I am most active, and the Instagram handle is Grounded in Maine Podcasts.